Hello, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Leamon, Jay, and Mark, and today we will be doing Fires of Ra Act 2, Part 1. We'll see how far we can get into Act 2, Swallowed by Sand. Before we jump into the meat of this episode, we do encourage you to write us at torgdcd@gmail.com. You can send us questions about anything and everything Torg or Torg Eternity related. We'll answer to the best of our ability. If you make comments, we'll comment back. And we also are interested in anything that you might have for Fires of Ra, stories you might have, either game mastering and or playing. Anything on that as well. So our last two episodes were about Act 1, which was taking place in Cairo, and at the end of the last episode, we discussed various ways that the Storm Knights could find informations to get into Act 2, Swallowed by Sand. But this act shifts from Cairo to the deserty part of the Nile Empire, so you have kind of a whole switch of scenery, and you have desert and tombs and things like that. And so Jay, overall thoughts on Act 2, Swallowed by Sand?
Overall, I think that whenever people say that the Nile Empire feels like Indiana Jones, this is what they're talking about. This act is pretty much, the high action and classic temple exploration. One of the things I like about the Nile Empire is the fact that it's not just ancient Egypt, because I've been like ancient Egypt out through D&D and like other games and everything, and just mythology in general, although it's cool. There's so much of it out there. So it's always nice that it has this extra like modern or, kind of modern element to it. There's trucks and other things going on, as well as all the fantastical ancient Egyptian mythology. However, that said, it is nice sometimes to get more into your classic tomb raiding with some mummies and some death traps and all that good action. And for reasons I'll explain later, my players really enjoyed this act as well. So we really enjoyed it.
Mark, your overall thoughts for Act 2, Swallowed by Sand?
100% agree with Jay. This is Indiana Jones. You've got all of the stuff with the opening scene with air combat and the pocket fighters coming in and having to figure out how not to die in an airplane crash. You've got the showing up at a dig, going into the dig in the tomb, the death trap in the tomb, which we'll get to all these things in a little bit, right? And then the train race out to get out. And it's just, I really enjoyed the Act 2 because it to me has a little bit of everything, almost a little bit of everything Nile Empire, whereas Act 1 had everything that Act 2 doesn't have. Act 1 had. And so between Act 1 and Act 2, you get kind of the full picture, like a 2-page spread image of the Nile Empire. Now, the problem that you run into, and new GMs, if you've got any veteran players, the problem with that you'll run into is that, as Jay pointed out, Nile Empire is one of the most. Every time Torganized Play takes a poll on what's your favorite cosm, Nile Empire is always one or two, always. We haven't done it in a while, and maybe this far into the campaign, we got to see where people are now. But it always comes up as number 1 and number 2, and so it gets played a lot. And when you write your own stuff, Nile Empire tends to have a lot of the things that you want in your story, and so you end up going there or back, or you pulling elements out and forward. So for the veteran players, Nile Empire can tend to feel like it's overplayed because there's a lot that gets done with Nile Empire, because it's a lot of fun. It's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for the Storm Knights, because if you get the right Cosm cards and you're set up properly, there's a safety net. You can do almost anything you want, and even if you get killed, it's not permanent. You can come back from that. The hero or the villains are the same way, and so you can almost do anything you want in the Nile Empire with almost no consequences if you do it properly. It can be very, very dangerous if you don't. So watch out. But the point is, for the veteran players, for you new GMs, you might think this is great and fresh and cool, and the veteran players have been through this 3 or 4 times, and it's kind of trite to them at this point. So understand who your player group is when you go into it, and kind of figure out, maybe feel out the room and understand what they've seen before, so you don't watch them go, okay, here we go again.
I really like Act 2. This is probably one of my favorite acts in Fires of Ra. Not to say that the other acts weren't good. We just had a lot of... that's weird video stuff like last time happening.
I saw that.
But we're recording, so... Sorry about that. If you were listening, you were like, what are they talking about? If you're viewing, you might see some weird stuff where our pictures get, our videos get replaced by background stuff, but it's not affecting the audio. So yeah, I really liked Act 2. This was one of my home groups, as I stated previously, went through Act 1 and 2, and it led to some cool scenes, as well as a very impactful decision was made by one of my players at the end of this act. That when we get to that, I'll talk about that. But let's jump into Scene 1, Mayday. As Mark said, it is a plane, kind of a fight with some packet fighters. Jay, what are your thoughts on Scene 1, Mayday, the airplane fight, or
so I think
shot out of the sky?
Yeah. Well, the thing about that is that my players had made new characters for all of this. They had been playing for a while on their original characters. Mm-hmm. So this was probably the 5th time they got shot out of the sky in either the Nile Empire or the Living Land. Right. And they're basically like, look, we're never getting in a plane again. But it went fine. The plane part, like they knew the score at this point. Like it's one of the tropes, and Torg and Nile especially runs on tropes, so you just got to be willing to go with it. One character had a high enough toughness that she just stayed on the plane and threw all the supplies out as it was going down, while everyone else parachuted down. And the explosion didn't even do like enough damage I think it did a wound. So It was like, okay. So she came out of the wreckage. That was the Cyber Papal character. And so they stood there for a little bit, and eventually the Bedouins show up, and you could talk to them to find out about what's been going on in the area. You can also get directions on how to get to was it Abu Minkar is the place where you're going? Yes, Abu Minkar. Because there's the contact of Shafira's. Oh, and this is one big thing, actually. My players were adamant that Shafira stay in Cairo. They did not want her to come with them. They didn't want to have like a regular Ord in danger. Mm-hmm. And like they're like, look, you already got kidnapped once. We know how this works. So they forced her to stay home. And so that immediately kind of put her into a quantum state of either she's at home or she hid and followed them somehow, right?
Right.
But in the end, she was
reporter.
In the end, she was at home the whole time, like because if they had ever played that reporter Cosm card, she would have just popped up, right?
That would be funny.
Yeah. So
perfect.
So the Bedouins show up, and the players immediately blow all of their persuasion rolls. They fail everything. At which point Zoe, the Cyber Pupple character, if you recall, is famous for her videos of killing demons. Plays because the famous lets you fish out a connections card.
Mm-hmm.
She fishes out a connections card. So, oh, actually, one of these Bedouins in the middle of the desert is a fan. And so,
Okay.
yeah, so I
They
have to
got the
figure
little
out how that
satellite
works.
dish outside
Yeah,
of the tent.
yeah, he's the tech guy, right? So eventually that breaks the ice, and they are able to talk with the leader of the Bedouins and actually formulate a plan against Mobius, like it actually, you know, would have happened if they didn't blow all their persuasion checks. And then from then the Bedouins give them the directions to get to Abu Minkar, which is the next scene. So it worked out pretty well, but it used up that famous connection card in the first scene.
Mm-hmm.
So that was out of commission. Now I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Mark, your thoughts on Scene 1, Mayday?
I like Scene 1 Mayday. I'm a big fan of when you begin either an act or a whole thing to get the dice rolling. Everybody's here to play the game. Everybody's here to roll dice. So let's do something that gets the dice rolling. And Scene 1 does just that with a casual, you're flying on the plane and everything's hunky-dory. And then all of a sudden, I always started out with that, okay, so who's piloting the plane? You find out who the pilot is, who the co-pilot is, where everybody else is in the plane, and they're all just like, there's some goats and sheeps, and it's that what's that scene where they're flying over the is it from the
Temple of Doom?
Is it Mummy, something like it? Anyway, it's any of that. We're flying a plane over the Alps, and it's we had to beg, borrow, or steal it, and it's got livestock jammed in these homemade crates in the back, and it stinks, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is miserable! I'll never do this again." And then all of a sudden, pop, 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 and you don't hear gunfire, you just hear pop, 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 and holes open up in the fuselage. What's going on? And look outside, and here comes a packet flying by, and so now you're in rounds, right? Great fun, everybody's rolling dice, but you got to figure out who's flying the plane, because you can do it with raw. This is, to me, one of the weak points of the driver character, or the fact that you don't really need the driver perks, because if whoever the high dex character is, they can just drop into the seat and off you go. You're flying, and they have a good chance of successfully piloting a plane. Which, if you've ever taken, when you were a kid, you poked your head into the cockpit of the airline if you were going anywhere. Those things are complicated. I don't care how dexy you are. You're not sitting down in one of those and, I'll figure it out. But anyway, that I've always had a problem with that. I like to have people with air vehicles actually do it. And so sometimes I will make an adjustment that it's harder to do if you're just raw dex. But if you have air vehicles, you understand the concept of flight and where the instrumentation layout is and how it works and what you're looking for. There are there's a notation in here that kind of gets missed over, but there's enough parachutes for everybody to bail out of the plane. And you, the GM, don't have to figure out how they get off the plane. As Jay was pointing out, somebody's just like, I'm just going to write it in, and let if that's what they want to do, that's fine. This is the Nile Empire. The law of drama says, let the heroes be heroic. If they think they can manage it, maybe they can, maybe they can't. Let them try. If they think they've got a different way to get off the plane than the parachutes because they're not sure how that works, let them try. You might give them a very easy DNA check to understand the consequences of let them try, meaning, okay, if this fails, here's the damage that you're likely to take, because it starts with 5 plus a BD. And if you've GM'd Torg for any length of time, the moment you see a BD on the list, things could go really, really wrong really quickly. It's like, oh yeah, here's a 4, here's a 4, here's an 80. You're like, where did that number come from? Well, it exploded, and I got to do a lot of math, and here I am with this huge number that's going to erase one of my Storm Knights, and we're in the first scene of the second act. Well, that's not how that's supposed to go. But with exploding dice, it often does. So let them understand the consequences with a simple. Don't encourage them to waste any resources on it. Just if they make a simple roll, they understand. Yeah, this could hurt. And then when they make the choice and it hurts, they did it with their eyes open.
So, I fully agree with Jay on the plane crash trope. Not just within Torg Eternity, but the entire history of Torg. Back in classic Torg, I had one player who was a realm runner that his trademark vehicle was a Grumman Goose so that he could fly it and it could land on both land or water because it had like the pontoon stuff as well as actual wheels. And that thing was held together. The joke was with bubble gum and bungee cords and duct tape. And it was always crashing. And the first time that I had two groups combine, and they were all in the Grumman Goose, that was called Oh Lordy. Because that's what the pilot always said when things were going to happen. That everybody, or the people that had been there before, all had previously bought parachutes and then laughed as the other ones hadn't bought parachutes because in classic Torg you bought all your equipment. You didn't need to, there was no requisitions and stuff. And there were times where just as fond memories where there wasn't enough parachutes, so they're fighting over who gets the parachute. And they're looking at the Tharcold going, you freaking have wings. You don't need it. Give it up. Give it up. As they're trying to, as the Tharcold is like, I want double protection from this and stuff. So when in those players then play Torg Eternity, that mindset comes. So even though this specifically says that there's enough parachutes for everybody, as soon as I mentioned plane, they went, we go get parachutes. We requisition, the beginning of the act, going through requisitions or whatever, boom, parachutes. Everybody gets a parachute. And I just let them go with it because that's just how the trope is and how it's been reinforced with my game. So I didn't even say, hey, I wasn't mean and said, hey, you look under your seat and there's parachutes for everybody. I just let them have their fun with preparing. So that was fun, getting shot down. And it's not the first time they've been shot down in a desert. The very, very first glory ever played in my game was digging the plane out of the desert after it crash landed, which they still talk about to this day. So this, to me, was fun, not just because the scene itself is fun, which it is, but because it was bringing back all those memories to my players of all the previous plane stuff, even though the pilot in classic Torg was an electric samurai in this game, so wasn't doing it. But then he got to feel how everybody else felt when he was the pilot. So great scene, great, crash, parachute, get shot out of the sky, type thing. And then after they crash, we get into scene 2, a warm welcome. So Jay, your thoughts on a warm welcome?
So this is a pretty quick scene, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
The party arrives in Abu Minkar, and the idea is that Shafira is there to take them to Abdul Bishara's shop and introduce them and everything. But my group did not have Shafira. Now, she left them, very detailed instructions and a code phrase and everything, but they did have to find the place, which they kind of got lost for a bit, but they eventually got there. And the moment they met him and they started talking to Abdul, my players were like, "This guy is gonna betray us." It's like before a sentence was out of his mouth. But they get everything set up, and then they leave his shop, and then they get they're being followed. They notice they're being followed by shock troopers, and the Core Earth Merc kind of just goes crazy and starts shooting at them and causes a whole scene in the souk, and they end up having to run away. But they've got their directions at least. But yeah, it was pretty straightforward. They were trying to be very careful, and then just inadvertently caused a shootout in the packed market, which seems to be that character's, I don't know, primary goal. We'll come back to that later.
So, Mark, your thoughts on Scene 2, A Warm Welcome?
The warm welcome, yeah, absolutely. Everybody who meets Abdul is, we're just watching you, because at some point you're going to do something shady. You're going to pick up a phone. You're going to wave a handkerchief. You're going to do something, and here come the bad guys. And sure enough, they are not disappointed when he does, in fact, show up with a bunch of shock troopers to try and collect a reward. So, I mean, it was an expected... Everybody was channeling Indiana Jones and the temple scene, or not the temple, the market scene with the whip and the guy with the sword and all of that. And it tended to run into, when they showed up, they realized this guy's going to betray us. Oh, but look, he's got access to a whole bunch of stuff. Maybe before he betrays us, we can buy some stuff we need and find the silver lining in this storm cloud. So everybody tried to buy stuff from him, or steal stuff from him, or acquire some explosives or grenades or whatever. And it usually worked. But it's kind of the standard, okay, you're in the Nile Empire and you're really in Egypt, so we need to have shock troopers. And here are the ubiquitous shock troopers. They're really not a threat to anybody because they're shock troopers. And this is a really great time for the Storm Knights to just mow down a bunch of low-level mooks. So don't be afraid to throw a bunch of them at your Storm Knights, because the shock trooper is kind of the kobold of Torg. They're just there. They're bowling pins. They're there to be knocked down. So let them knock them down.
This is a fun one, because at least for my group, we started a little bit differently. If you haven't watched Part 1 and Act 1, Part 1, and Part 2, go watch that, because a lot of things that we talk about are going to be building off of stuff. So,
oh yes,
at the end of the last act, as I mentioned, it ended differently. So the Storm Knights kind of quote unquote failed that mission, and they were given this as the next mission. So that's why they knew that they were getting on a plane. They were supposed to go to a place, land, and then go to the dig site. So they already kind of knew where the dig site was, but the plane crashed. So then they were quote unquote rescued, brought in, figured out where they were supposed to go, and were able to get betrayed and all of that stuff. I will also mention the shock trooper. Again, I love talking about what my group's done and things, because I always feel that if you can bring personal examples into it, it can give other game masters things to do. Although this probably will never happen to anybody else ever. Back in Classic Torg, we would have a Halloween role-playing night, which we would go out into cabins in the woods and role-play for a weekend. And usually the big Saturday game was me game mastering Torg for 18 to 25 people. And then we would dress up in Halloween costumes, whatever. It could be whatever you wanted. But one year, my friend, Bob, and Bob doesn't care if I'm using his real names. He's probably, if he watches this, he's probably puffing up. He dressed up as a Nile Storm trooper, or shock trooper, in the Egyptian kilt, sandals, headdress, and a gun, a rifle. And I found a picture of this, and I turned it into a token, and then on the VTT. And as soon as, I brought up the VTT and brought out the tokens, and there were all those shock troopers, everybody groaned except Bob, who was like, yes! Yes! So everybody else was like, my eyes! Why didn't you just do the face? No. But I like adding little touches to that. So, that was 30 years ago. At the time, it's probably 25 years difference, adding that to Torg Eternity as the token. And now, anytime I'm doing a VTT and shock troopers are involved, it's Bob dressed up like
Bob the shock trooper.
As a
Bob
shock.
as a shock trooper token. So that was great to throw out there and for everybody to see and just go reminisce and have fun on it. But
Can I backtrack a second for
Sure.
scene one? I was looking at notes from the streaming and I forgot to mention this. The Bedouins are great because the Nile Empire tends to be either a scene change or a place to missions, adventures, and you end up in the deserts frequently. Don't just hand wave I suggest you don't hand wave the Bedouins. The Bedouins in this act alone are going to show up a couple of times, and they're very useful. Jay kind of glossed over it because his group blew their persuasion checks. But if you don't blow your persuasion checks with the Bedouin, you can have a great RP situation with that. Give them some names and some personalities because they're going to show up, and they can be a reoccurring group. Anytime you're in the desert and somebody drops a connection card, you can have a Bedouin that they know show up, or somebody from the tribe they know show up. So this is a great if this is your first adventure for your group when you enter into Torg Eternity, which is not a bad choice. This tribe of Bedouins could show up a lot, and so this is a great introduction to them. And just don't hand wave it is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. There was a comment, I believe it was for the last episode, that somebody was talking about that. Yes, Torg Eternity is a world, and having places and people that you remember and you go back to in the game kind of makes it more real, that it's not just every location is a throwaway location, every group of people is a throwaway location. So do keep those. Did the group, did the Bedouins, did they,
were they friendly or not?
Were they friendly or not? How did those did they botch their persuasions? Oh, now the famous person got a connection. Bring that in if you use them later, and that's always a good thing to kind of remember what's going on. So they escape the little trap that was set by the betrayal, but then they, through whatever means, they now have the location for the dig site, which is kind of that dig site from the original Indiana Jones, kind of set up. So a dig in the desert, scene 3. Jay, your thoughts on a dig in the desert?
Yeah, I mean, this is basically Raiders of the Lost Ark, that whole scene with the sunset and the digging and everything. In this scene, they made extensive use of the disguise spell. I believe this was before it was errated to only be once per day. Mm-hmm. So they at least constantly had the Optant Akrek disguised, like 24/7. He was disguised to just look like a standard worker. But in this case, they basically just disguised themselves to look like workers and waited for the Bedouins to attack, as had been arranged during scene 1. And I will say, it wasn't just like, oh, we botched, oh, we did that. There was some RP. It was kind of played like Rambo 3 situation where, because there was the one famous person, so everyone would come and talk to them and everything, and then they played some games and stuff. But ultimately, when this happened, the Bedouins attacked, the camp is in turmoil, and they extremely easily snuck through. So this scene went even faster for me than the previous one. It's also worth kind of mentioning on the Infiniverse Exchange, there's an adventure called Possibility Blackout, which is kind of like, I don't know what happened there,
Yeah.
which is kind of a redo of the um like the intro adventure from the old Torg box set. And so part of that involves there's a plane dogfight. There's infiltrating a work camp like this. And so we had basically done that like a couple of months before we played this. So
Mhm.
the players were very like, hey, didn't we just do this? So I did kind of like get us through this part a little bit quicker than maybe I could have, because I was just sort of looking at it like, yeah, like they just want to sneak through. There is a distraction. And what's the alternative? There's going to just be untold fights with shock troopers. And I mean, how many years of my life do I need to be rolling for shock trooper
Troopers.
attacks? I'm like, fine, we can just get through it, and you guys could think of this as a nice, quick way to cycle some destiny cards at the end of the scene. But they got through, and it made them feel like they were really cool and badass, even though it was pretty easy. So I guess that works too.
Mark, your thoughts on Dig in the Desert?
Yeah, this was almost a throwaway scene for me. They did real well talking with the Bedouins. Let's see, Yaren in our stream, Yaren, they got an outstanding persuasion roll, so the Bedouins volunteered the information about the upcoming attack and that would pull them away from the place that they wanted to go, this, that, and the other. And so it was very simple because of that outstanding. Okay, they just sneak right in, boom, we're done. It does mention that there's 3 platoons, which roughly could be anywhere from 60 to 90 shock troopers, depending on how many you want to put in there, which is a lot of shock troopers for anybody. And as Jay pointed out, how many years of my life do I need to spend watching my players take out shock troopers? But that's, I mean, if they blow their Bedouin rolls and then they blow their sneak rolls and you're left with no other alternative, yeah, you can just throw wave after wave of shock troopers at them until they've taken them all out. Get driven off, come back, and after they've rested and got healed and shocked, come back and take them on. Give them a time limit before the train reinforces the shock troopers and their casualties are taken out, because you've only got a few. I can't remember, it was a couple hours, 8 hours, 6 hours, something like that before the train can come back. And so there's more troops coming. So you've got that kind of time. But, whatever. For us, it was we're going to sneak in. The Bedouins attacked. Here's our sneak rolls. We're in. Done. Next scene.
Yeah, I did a similar to it. I had it where my party, they did an extensive scout of the site. So they sent in their best stealth person to go through and figure out when guard changes and all that stuff would happen, or when people moved around. And the Bedouins didn't directly attack. They mostly just like came in, made a bunch of ruckus, and went off, because I knew that from what my party was doing that they wanted to sneak in, and I didn't want to lower the stormtrooper number. I wanted to inflate it at the towards the end of the act for a reason that we'll get into. That is one of those the best laid plans of game masters often go awry type situation. But they were able to case out the dig, disguise themselves with some clothes and desert garb and stuff, and sneak into the temple, which brings us to scene 4, the Temple of the Eye. So, Jay, your thoughts on the Temple of the Eye?
So this is when it all picks up, for me anyway. This is when we get into, a temple, a dungeon, for those, the classic RPG experience, I suppose. A few things interesting about this. So I don't think my group we hadn't done any like explore the temple kind of stuff in the Nile Empire at this point. So this was when they were introduced to the way the traps work, where it's don't do a detect trap every 5 feet. Oop.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Video for you audio people listening.
So don't tell me everything you're gonna. I'm assuming that you are checking for traps, and if there's a trap, we'll roll to see if you find it. And the thief in my D&D game was like, "Oh my god!" And this basically changed how I did traps in D&D as well after this, because I was so many years, especially in Hackmaster, of like players being so paranoid. I check this 5 feet. I check this 5 feet. I check the door. I check the handle. Checking the doors. Checking the locks. Checking under the door. Whatever. It's too much. So this was a breath of fresh air, not only in Torg, but in my other campaigns as well. So thank you, Tilly. That said, they got past the trap really easy. And then they get to the false chamber of the eye, which I think every GM is looking forward to seeing what their players do here. And I should also add, one of the other players and myself have been playing a lot of an MMO called The Secret World. And one of the sections in that is in Egypt. It's modern day Egypt, but it's also got a bunch of ancient stuff as well. And there's a lot of traps very similar to this. So one of my players was like almost like perfectly prepared for this trap. And he managed to do it on the first try and only screwed up on the last tile. So he made it all the way, and then on the last one got blasted. And then when they realized how much damage it did, the cyber papacy, the tank character, was like, "Oh, I just walked across." Fireball constantly, but doing just shock. Then when she got to the other side, just took a bit of a breather. Then they found out it's fake, and then they found the button and accessed the rest of it. Underneath that, you have the first time we encounter some mummies, some good old-fashioned mummies. But again, the Zoe had an Ehud dagger, which is fire, and had a super high strength. So she was just cutting right through them. Our alchemist, our Aurortian alchemist sorcerer, Dr. Oswald. This is when he started to complain about not being able to use any of his like hypnos pellets, or his pretty much all of his spells and concoctions worked on living people and were completely useless on undead. So he was sort of reverted to just a disguise guy for Akric for a lot of this. But they got past the mummies, no real issues. For the life of me, the Whirling Hall of Knives, again, Zoe just walked down it. And you would think that this kind of hubris would bite her in the ass at some point, but it never does. So she just walks through. Then they get into the death trap with the sands. And this is when Oswald, Dr. Ozzy, he basically continues the tradition in my campaign of the Ororsh character being the one that has to do all of the DSRs for whatever reason. They just have a good mixture of skills, I guess, and stats. So they get out of it pretty easily, if I recall. I don't remember any specifics. And I also don't really remember anything about the scarabs being an issue. They pretty much get the Eye of Sebek without too much difficulty. And Akric, the Optent, takes it. So this is at the point where his character starts to get a little more defined, because he is a Gold Sun Optent, and he's basically addicted to shiny things. So any gold they find... by the end of this adventure, he's running around like freaking King Tut. Like he's covered in Egyptian gold that they've scavenged from these things. But he's got the shiny rock, and he's able, because he's got the requisite spirit axiom, he's able to lightning strike people with it. So he's quite happy with all that. And they seemingly make their way out of the temple without any real issues. It's coming down Metroid style, which they kind of assumed was going to be the case. So they book it out. just as everything collapses. But then, of course, this is probably the hardest fight of the entire thing, is me convincing one of my players that it's okay to surrender. Because as they come out, there's Hooded Cobra and like all the men that they came back. So lots of shock troopers, more than they could The thing is, shock troopers, as Mark said, are kind of like the kobolds, so they probably could actually have taken all these shock troopers. But I had to really go hard on the whole, like, no, this is like getting captured's part of it. Think of James Bond. Think of all these things, and he just wanted to go out blaze of glory kind of thing. So that took a bit of doing, and I think that's probably, depending on your group, is going to be one of the biggest challenges for this. He's the guy that wanted to chainsaw off all the heads of any Nile villains they fight just so they don't come back. And I'm just like, that's not going to stop them. It was a robot, obviously. But some people can get into it. Some people don't really get into it. And it's kind of an interesting issue, because if you were a Nile character, this is obviously you should surrender. But if you're a core Earth character and you are still playing your reality and you've got the law of hope and the law of the underdog, you would probably think you could take them, right? So it's a bit of a tough sell. Like, don't play it like your character would. Play it more like the realm you're in would. Also, we got to finish this adventure. Don't cost shit. That kind of thing. But ultimately, they got captured, and it all worked out.
So, Mark, your thoughts on the Temple of the Eye?
This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire book. It's not my favorite scene, but it's one of my favorite scenes in the entire book. It's certainly my favorite scene in this act, and it's my favorite scene out of the first two acts, I think. The floor with the puzzle, and there's a lot of meat in this one scene. You got a lot going on here, and it's a lot of what makes the Nile Empire. You got a death trap in here. You got a temple exploration that's going to take a long time. Just this one scene. You could spend a lot of time just on the puzzle. I recommend. I'm a fan of player puzzles. I know that some of the modern gamers are not a big fan of the player puzzles, and they're like, well, what does my character know? And they just want to roll dice and overcome numbers and whatever. And I'm like, however, you do it how you want to do it. They give you a key to this in the back, and letting your players figure this out is part of the game. To me, is part of the fun. But if they're just like, they step on everything and get zapped until they figure it out, and they just get knocked down, that's not fun. People don't enjoy just getting blasted in the face because they can't figure something out. So at any rate, you get down below, and you've got this on page 28. You've got a nice 3D map of the underground portions of the temple, and it's really, really cool. And it's very Nile Empire to have the false chamber be the false chamber, but they don't know it's the false chamber, and they can't figure that out until they get across. And once they get across, this is just a piece of glass, and all of a sudden now they realize there's a whole bigger thing to do. A lot of fun working their way through that with the whirling knives and the sands of death. The death trap. Read up on death traps. Know how a death trap operates. Be conversant in the differences between just your standard DSR and what makes a death trap a death trap. And don't be afraid to obstacle pile. If you're not familiar with that term, it's just when bad goes to worse, out of the frying pan into the fire. Those kinds of things, and it just keeps getting worse, and it keeps getting worse. Do it incrementally, not great big death worse followed by even more death worse. But you've got a -2 piled on. Now you can't move very well, so you're half speed. Just little bitty things that make life harder, and it doesn't even have to really impact the mechanic of the death trap so much as limit what the like movement inside this death trap's not really a big deal. But when you tell them, yeah, the sands are really bogging you down, you're down to half or a quarter speed now, they're going to freak out because they're in the middle of a death trap. They know they've got a 5-round limit, and you're flipping drama cards, and it's a death trap. And now they can't move right. And they're like, oh, what's coming next? And you hit them with something next. Hit them with something next. And it's fun. The betrayal, keep this in mind. And there's a sidebar on page 26, I think. Or is it 26? No, where's the sidebar? The sidebar is on 23. There's a sidebar talking about the Waz Scepter. The Waz Scepter is cool down here. If you've got it, our group found it, and it turns stuff off, so they just stroll through, which makes some of this easier. If you don't have the Waz Scepter, that's fine. And this goes for the above ground portion too, with those 60 shock troopers. If they've blown all of their rolls and they have the Waz Scepter, or if Hooded Cobra knows they're there, Hooded Cobra is a smart guy. He's going to know the heroes are here to go into that place and find the thing I want. Why should I risk my neck when they'll risk their necks? So if I just pull my troops back and let them have it and go in, all I have to do is keep them from leaving, and I can get the thing. And if they die down there, it's a win-win. So Hooded Cobra's happy to let them have the entrance and get in there. So you don't have to have your shock troopers keep them from getting in there. Once they're in there, and as Jay pointed out, it's a super difficult task to keep your heroes, your players who want to fight and don't want to get captured, because it's very counterintuitive in almost every other role-playing game to get captured. But in the Nile Empire, sometimes that's exactly how the plot gets moved along, is you get captured. And this is Indiana Jones, once again, when his girlfriend gets captured and they learn valuable stuff. And then he goes, and he remember the scene, he's going to go cut her loose. And then he's like, wait, I can't cut you loose. And she's freaking out as he puts the gag back on her. And she's like, oh, come back. And he has to leave. And he's really sad about it, but he does it anyway. Getting captured is part of it. And if you have Nile Empire Storm Knights in your group, those guys can help you sell it to the rest, because when Hooded Cobra and his X number of shock troopers are ringing that area with Schmeisers all pointed at everybody, which the Cyber Knight could probably have taken and just strolled into them and started punching them in the face and not sweated any of it, probably without a problem. When your Nile Empire guy just kind of raises his hands and then looks at his friends and gives them the head nod, like, raise your hands. This is how it works. Raise your hands. Because the Nile Empire character gets it. Right? So use that tool to help your other characters go, yeah, they've known something and you've been in the Nile Empire before, and you can remind them, yeah, this happens occasionally. It's not the end of the world. It's an interesting and challenging end from a GM standpoint to help your players not just go, yeah, flip a card, we're killing everybody.
So yeah, I also really enjoyed Scene 4 and think it's one of the best. The isometric 3D map on 28 is really nice, although I was using something weird, and I might have stated this before. Whenever I play in person in real life, everybody's around a real table, we always do theater of the mind, but when we did VTTs, everybody wanted battle maps. So I found a similar battle map. This was before I got a program that helps me make my own. I found one that was generally fit this. It had enough rooms that were connected in the same area.
A lot of Egyptian temples out there.
Yes, there's a lot of Egyptian temples to snag off the internet. And I went and found the Egyptian hieroglyphs that had a transparent background. So I actually I looked and, yes, spent the time to put a little thing on every tile. And like Jay, I had two people that pretty much figured it out right the puzzle for the false eye right away. They made one miscalculation, but it was like two people going, yeah, I got this. Yeah, I got this. Okay, I'll do it first. Messed up, and it's like, okay, now it's your turn. And then the next, and then the next person was able to get through it. So that was pretty easy, but it was fun. I like every once in a while have those player solved things. If the players get completely stumped, then you can have them roll for maybe a clue or something. But there's always different ways. Like we actually had as I've mentioned before, a Stallinger. He could have flown over it. So, but it's funny that character or that the player usually doesn't exploit stuff like that. I do have a interesting thing that happens on my VTT though, which is one or two players tend to get bored when the other players just stand and talk about, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And tend to start moving their tokens further, to try to be like, hey, catch up with us. And if the other ones are still talking, my party on a virtual tabletop easily gets split. So there were multiple times with these death traps that only half of the party was present because they had forged ahead and then set off the death trap, and the rest of the party couldn't get to them. Like when the big door, closes and then the sand comes, is pouring in, and half the party's back with the knife, the whirling blade trap because they were still back there and hadn't gone forward. So that was fun. The Scarab Swarm, those are fun as a introduction. The first time swarms are introduced to your Torg Eternity game, I find is very fun because it's just an automatic amount of damage that is given at a time. I'm not sure about Mark, but there, Mark.
Oh, that was me. Sorry, I was hiding.
Hiding's fine. It's just with all the other visual things happening. So that was
hacking up a lung. I'm trying not to do it on camera.
Yeah, that was very fun. The Scarab Swarm, they got the eye, and when they came out, that's when I was able to. As I said previously, I wanted to even enhance the number of shock troopers because, as both Jay and Mark have stated, it's very anti-players who have played other role-playing games to surrender, because especially if they've done, if they came from 70s, 80s gaming where surrender usually meant you just got killed and, under some game masters and some adventures and stuff. But everybody was like, okay, there's 180 shock troopers out there, hooded Cobra, screaming in my bad Cobra Commander accent, doing a horrible impersonation of Chris Latta, screaming at them to surrender and laughing and stuff. I have two players that love martyr cards. They just love martyr cards because they like going through characters and trying different things.
Got one of them.
All my other players like keeping their character forever and ever, and that's their character, and they love their character. Everybody, and including the people that love the martyrs, were like, okay, we'll surrender in that. And my player who has never, in 30 years, has never played a martyr card, she said, I want to palm off the eye into another character's hand. I'm like, okay, what's she going with this? Okay. So she rolls an outstanding, palms it off, nobody notices. She holds her hands up, to the hooded Cobra and, walks over to get to him, and then reveals that she has her grenade and drops it. And the rest of the party takes the eye and runs away. And I was kind of, like I said, if it would have been one of my other two players, I would have been, yeah, this is what they're going to do. I would have understood it. but this was a player who has never used the martyr card and usually passes it away or trades it for the card a possibility all the time. And this was the moment that she was like, I want to martyr my character to prevent Hooded Cobra from getting the eye. So I was like, I'm not going to take that away from the player who's, never used a martyr card, and that this is the time that she's done it. I'm going to let it mean something. So Hooded Cobra died, and he never came back. He never came back. His daughter came back as the new Hooded Cobra. So
Nice.
As we've talked about in previous Nile Empire, when we were probably with the Cosm cards and stuff about legacy characters. So sometimes you don't have to bring that person back, but you bring that title back or that hero back as a legacy, that role back. So that having happened in my game that I game mastered, we did not move on to scene 5 because they were able to get away. But the game that I played under with Mark was the game master. We went through it, and enough time had passed that I was completely confused at where this scene had came from. Because a lot of the times I'll play a game that I game master or even one that I wrote, and enough time's gone past that I can't remember anything, or I can remember you have to do 1 and then you can do 2, but I don't remember which one's 1 and 2 and things like that. But this one I was completely like, is he just making up an entire scene? Because I do not remember the scene at all. But it was because the impactful part for me and my group was one of my players who in 30 years never used a martyr card, decided that this was the moment to martyr her character, and it had that impact on it. So, Jay, your thoughts on scene 5?
I'm a little foggy on the exactly what happened. That said, I know I really liked this chase. I think I said before, I liked the chase in Act 1, Scene 1, in Act 1 with the boats, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite. I think this was my second favorite out of all of them. And again, to go back to Secret World, there is a whole section in that game where you are literally chasing people on a train. So the second part of this felt a lot like that, which was good for myself and the other person who played that game. So the other thing is I had set this up on the VTT as multiple maps. There was the exterior, but then I had it broken down car by car for the train as well. So there was a progression there. And I know for a while it was kind of looking like they were going to get outrun. And my players played a friendly neighborhood vigilante Cosm card, which is one of my Cosm cards that I put out in the Infiniverse Exchange. So that just has a pulp hero show up to help you. So it was a rocket ranger, we decided, that had been sent by Shafira. And so she came down, and basically they just started calling her Rocket Girl, and she kind of became a recurring character named Rocket Girl. But so she basically shot up the train and slowed it down a little bit so the rest of them could get on. There was a pretty extensive series of fighting, but they managed to stop. I don't remember exactly how it happened. Hooded Cobra died somehow. I think he got kicked off the train and got run over by the train or something like that and bisected. He was dead until the final act. Because I was trying to decide if I wanted to keep him dead or not, because I do find it kind of slightly cheesy when they always come back. But on the other hand, Hooded Cobra is such a iconic, just dirtbag. I love him. So I spent the rest of the adventure basically saying he was dead, and then had him come back with steampunk legs at the very end, because I wanted to be able to play the theme music one more time. So after that, until that final reveal, Lady Hourglass basically took over the Retribution League, which also made things interesting because of the star-crossed lovers thing going on as well. But yeah, unfortunately, I just don't remember too much about the specifics because it was like a lot of rolling and card playing, and it wasn't really much RP, which tends to be what is more memorable when you're doing these games. But
Right.
it was still really fun, and I believe everyone enjoyed it. It gave us a recurring NPC. It kind of changed the status quo. Akrik got to use the Eye of Sebek, and he came up with some stupid name for it. I can't remember now what it was, but I remember it was annoying. But he was using it all the time. Yeah, it was really good. It was a nice end to an act.
And Mark, your thoughts on Scene 5, the 310 to Thebes.
I very much enjoyed this chase. And we kind of made it into a DSR chase in that I set up, I had 3 boxes set up on the virtual tabletop, and each box was the back end of the train, the middle portion of the train, the engine of the train. And because the write-up for it breaks down some things that are in the train cars, doesn't tell you which car where, it does talk about the back and the front. And there was a lot going on because we had a Rocket Ranger, and they had picked, I think they picked a truck that they were driving alongside through the desert and catching up. And at one point they get close, and the Rocket Ranger, he declared he wanted to swoop up in the front, and I can't remember exactly how it worked out, but he got Glory to swoop in there and surprise. I think he maybe stealth or did a combination of something, but he got a 66 on his roll, gloriously swooping in there, and he scared Hooded Cobra, who wasn't expecting a Rocket Ranger to appear in the engine, and Hooded Cobra bobbled the Eye of Sebek, and it went over the side. And in the process of doing that, that's when, and it gets trite, but it's the Nile Empire, so it happens. Hooded Cobra decides, okay, the jig's up. I lost the eye. I got to get away. So he separates the engine from the rear, at which point all the rest of the team is on the train that's being separated away from the engine. The Rocket Ranger can remain with Hooded Cobra and fight it out one to one if he wants to, or he can go after the Eye of Sebek, which he saw where it went into the desert and nobody else did, or you can go back to the train. And so if I remember right, Lone Rocket Ranger chose to go get the Eye of Sebek. No, it wasn't. Did Crag, was it Crag? Oh, I got to check my notes now, because somebody borrowed his jetpack, and we started calling him Jetpack Boy, and he was the sidekick for the Rocket Ranger.
That's right. You said Rocket Girl, and I was like, I really think we had a Rocket Boy. But no, it was Jetpack Boy. That's right.
It's Jetpack Boy. Oh, dang, I'll figure it out. It might have been Crag. I don't remember who it was, but one of the other players borrowed something from him. He became Jetpack Boy, and I think he went. Yeah, Jetpack Boy secures the Eye of Sebek. It might have been Crag, but who was jumping from car to car, got his picture taken and into the news, and earned a possibility from it from playing. Oh, what's that daggone card?
Yeah, that
anyway,
reporter card.
They were like
yeah,
a reporter,
the reporter card, mistaken identity or whatever.
Front page, something like that.
Front page, yeah, something like that. And because a reporter popped up in the as he's hopping from car to car, and he went and gets his picture in the news. This is a lot of fun. However you want to run it. I ran it as a good old fashioned, bandits trying to jump onto the train, and then once you're on the train, you got to deal with the cars of the train to get to the front of the train, where the Eye of Sebek is with Hooded Cobra, who's gonna eventually decide he's got to either chuck it us over the side to hopefully get all the heroes to go get that and let him escape. And once again, Hooded Cobra is going to escape unless someone blows him up with a grenade and he dies. So hey. Hooded Cobra, I think, escaped in this one. No, he was captured and turned over to the Delphi Council for Incarceration, according to the notes. So I think Rocket Ranger decided to capture him, which is
If anything, This is showing us why it's good to take notes.
Yes.
It is. Yeah, it's real good, especially if you want to carry this stuff over. That's why Jetpack Boy went and got the Eye of Civic, because Rocket Ranger captured him and turned him over to the Delphi Council.
So yes, as I said, my group didn't get to this point so scene 5 was not done, and just like we've talked about before, adding acts, removing acts, sometimes kind of judge how is it going to work at your table. It's very legitimate to do so. It's the same thing with scenes. If you want to add scenes because your party is taking a different turn, feel free to do so. If you feel that a scene needs to be taken away, deleted, not used, you can. I still got this act. I still have the book. I could put this into somewhere else and just change the names and stuff, so it's not like I'm losing anything. But it was just my group got away because of that martyr. And something that's pointed out on the aftermath section of this is that at this point, either the Hooded Cobra has the eye or your group has the eye. It says either way, the trail is cold for the moment. The Delphi Council bids the Storm Knights return to Cairo for a meeting, and it kind of has a 2-act mini end of it. And because the group that I was taking through this, they had started doing Relics of Power, and those were coming out piecemeal, and we got to a point where the last couple of chapters had not came out yet. So I put these 2 in. By the time I was done with these 2, the next part of Relics of Power came out. So that group switched back to Relics of Power, and then the next group, a different home game, they did the final acts of Fires of Ra. So I actually split it where what the first group did, getting the eye and stuff, did affect the end, but it was a different character group that did, because one group was playing Torg Eternity at the time, and the other one we were playing something else at the time. So I felt that it was fine, and the groups, I always do cross groups, so I'll have 2 or 3 groups playing Torg, and then it'll go down to 1, and then it'll go back up to 3, and then for a while I have 2, and I have guest stars where one character from one group will go to a different group and do things like that. Is just my play style. But I kind of wrapped it up for one group with the end of Act 2, and then starting Act 3 was with a different group. But you can do the whole thing. There's nothing saying that you can't. I just wanted to point out that sometimes you can find those nice spots in the middle and put something else in there, so it's not just 7 full Nile Empire acts, one after another. So, any final words? We got through a whole Act 2, but we kind of went fast.
Yeah.
But this is a good act that kind of does go fast, and you get the action pile on action type stuff. So, any last thoughts about Act 2, Swallowed by Sand, Jay?
I mean, it's probably one of the more actiony ones. Aside from the Bedouins and maybe what you might do with Abdul, there's not as much like social encounters. You can always engineer social encounters if you really need to, but this is definitely one that favors the sort of typical Nile Empire flavor of people making bombastic heroes that just go around fighting a lot. So it's one of, as I said at the very beginning, it's one of the most Nile Empire acts.
Mark, final thoughts for Act 2, Swallowed by Sand.
It's a good act. As I said, it's a good opposite page to Act 1 for what the Nile Empire offers. Until you read the aftermath, I hadn't thought about the whole, this is, these 2 acts, you could just kind of separate them with a certain amount of time in between and do anything you wanted. And this is a great spot where you can insert anything else you want to do, because there's a good pause between here and when Act 3 picks up and how it picks up. Or you can play it through, either one. But I enjoy this act. This is probably this is a good introduction to the Nile Empire.
Yeah, I agree. This act has everything from your trope of your plane crash that happens in so many a lot in Torg Eternity Adventures. It has a cool temple to explore, some death traps to go through, and some fun, annoying villains that your players will remember in hatred.
Yes.
So, having said that, we thank you for listening to this episode. We will continue with Act 3 in the future. But until then, please do send us your emails at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we will read those. Again, any questions you might have, any comments you might have, as well as any stories about Fires of Ra that you might have. But otherwise, until next time, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye.